A fist slammed against wood 3 times. Hard. The whole wall shook. A woman froze in the dark, one hand pressed flat against the plaster, the other curled under her swollen belly. 3 more knocks came, slower this time, right behind her hand. She stepped back. Her back hit the kitchen counter. Something inside the wall thudded. Low, heavy. Her breath caught. The baby kicked. The knocking answered the kick. 3 taps. Soft, patient. Whatever was in there had been waiting a very long time, and now it knew she was listening. Her name was Hannah, 8 months pregnant. Alone in a cottage she'd never set foot in until 2 days ago. A cottage she now legally owned. A cottage her aunt had died inside 3 weeks before. What Hannah was about to find inside that wall would change everything she thought she knew. Stay with me on this one. 2 days earlier, Hannah pulled into a gravel driveway and shut off the engine. She sat there for a minute. Her back hurt. Her ankles hurt. Everything hurt. The cottage in front of her was small. White siding. Green shutters. A porch that sagged a little on the left side. It looked exactly the way she remembered it from when she was a child. She hadn't been here in 20 years. She got out slow. One hand under her belly. The other on the car door. The drive from Boston had taken her 6 hours. The baby had kicked every time she hit a pothole. She walked up the porch steps. The boards creaked. She turned the key. The smell hit her first. Lavender. Old wood. A little bit of dust. But not the smell of an empty house. Not the smell of death. Just the smell of a place that had been lived in for a long time and then left, suddenly mid-sentence. Her Aunt Maggie had died 3 weeks ago, in her sleep, 81 years old. The lawyer had called, said Maggie had left everything to Hannah. The cottage, the land, a small savings account, a note that said, "She's the only one I have left." Hannah hadn't cried. She didn't know why. She and Maggie hadn't spoken in years. Not because of any fight, just because life had pulled them in different directions, and Hannah had let it. She stepped inside. The cottage was small. 1 bedroom, kitchen, a living room with a wood stove, a bathroom that had been added on later. Maggie had lived here for 40 years alone. Never married. No children. Just her and the cottage and the woods behind it. Hannah's husband had left her 6 months ago. Walked out the day she told him she was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready. Said he'd send money. He never had. The apartment in Boston had gone up $200 a month, and her job had let her go when she got too big to lift the boxes. She had $800 in her account and a baby due in 4 weeks. The cottage was all she had. She set her suitcase down by the door, walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water at the sink. The water came out cold and clean. She drank it. She put a hand on the small of her back and looked around. It was a good little house. Warm. The wood stove still had ashes in it from Maggie's last fire. There was a coffee mug on the counter, washed, set upside down to dry. A blue dish towel folded next to it. Maggie had cleaned up before she went to bed that last night. She hadn't known it would be the last night. Hannah didn't unpack. Not that first day. She walked through every room, touched the walls, sat on the couch where her aunt used to sit, looked at the photographs on the mantel. There was one of Hannah as a little girl, maybe 4 years old, standing next to a woman Hannah didn't recognize. Her mother, probably. The picture was faded. The woman had Hannah's eyes. That night she slept on the couch. She couldn't bring herself to use Maggie's bed. The cottage was quiet. The kind of quiet that city people forget exists. No traffic. No sirens. Just the wind in the trees and the occasional creak of the wood settling. She slept for 10 hours. The next day she explored more carefully. She found the journals on the bookshelf. 5 of them, leather-bound, dated by year. The most recent one went up to 2 weeks before Maggie died. Hannah picked it up. The cover was locked with a small brass clasp. She didn't have the key. She set it back on the shelf. She found her aunt's clothes in the closet. her shoes by the door, her reading glasses on the kitchen table, folded next to a half-finished crossword. Hannah sat down at the table and worked on the crossword for an hour. She finished 3 more words. Then she pushed it aside. That afternoon she made tea. She stood by the kitchen counter and watched the steam rise. Outside, a bird called from somewhere in the woods. The cottage felt safe. It felt like the first safe place she'd been in a long time. Then she noticed something strange. The kitchen wall, the one behind the stove, was thicker than the others. The corner of the room didn't quite line up with the corner of the house outside. Like there was a foot of space unaccounted for. Hannah stood there with her tea and looked at it. She thought, that's odd. Then she thought, old houses are full of odd. And she went back to her chair. That night, just past midnight, she heard the first knock. 3 taps. Soft. Coming from the kitchen wall. She told herself it was the pipes. The knocking didn't stop. It came every night for the next 3 nights. Always around the same time. Just past midnight. Always 3 taps. Always from the same wall. Hannah told herself it was pipes. She told herself it was the house settling. She told herself 100 things, and none of them quite worked, because pipes don't knock in groups of 3, and houses don't settle on a schedule. By the 4th night, she stopped sleeping. She lay on the couch in the dark and listened. 3 taps. A pause. Then silence for the rest of the night. The next morning she'd get up and tell herself she'd imagined it. Pregnancy did things to you. Sleep deprivation did things to you. Grief did things to you. Even quiet grief for an aunt you hadn't talked to in years. On the 5th day she went looking for the key to the journal. She didn't know why she suddenly wanted to read it. Maybe because the silence in the cottage during the day was getting heavier. Maybe because she was alone, and reading her aunt's words felt a little like having company. She told herself it was nothing more than that. She searched the desk in the corner of the living room first. Nothing in the drawers. Nothing in the little wooden box where Maggie had kept her stamps. She got down on her hands and knees, which took some doing at 8 months pregnant, and looked under the desk. There was a small brass key taped to the underside. Hannah peeled the tape off. Her hands were shaking, and she didn't know why. She took the key to the bookshelf, pulled down the most recent journal, the one dated this year. The key fit. The clasp clicked open. She sat down at the kitchen table and started to read. The early entries were ordinary. Weather. The garden. A bird Maggie had seen at the feeder. Pages and pages of an old woman's small, quiet life. Hannah turned them slowly. Then, about 30 pages in, the entries changed. Fed her tonight. She was hungry. Bad winter coming. Hannah read it twice. Fed who? Maggie didn't have any pets. The lawyer had said so. No dogs. No cats. Hannah turned the page. Sang to her for an hour. She likes the old hymns best. The wall was cold today. I added a blanket on this side. A blanket on the wall. Hannah's mouth went dry. She kept reading. The entries went back years. Decades, even in the older journals she pulled down one by one. Maggie had been feeding someone, singing to someone, talking to someone. The someone lived in the wall. The someone was always referred to as she, never named, just she. There were instructions, too, tucked in among the daily entries. Things Maggie wrote to herself. Keep the kitchen warm in January. She gets cold. Don't let strangers in the house. She gets scared. She likes the lamp on at night. Leave it on. And then, in the most recent journal, an entry that stopped Hannah cold. She must never know. If anyone comes to live here after me, board it up. Brick over the door. Don't tell them. They won't understand. Some things should die when the person who loved them dies. Hannah set the journal down. She got up from the table. Slow, carefully, one hand on her belly. She walked to the kitchen wall. The thick one. The one that didn't line up with the outside of the house. She put her ear against the plaster. She listened. Nothing. She lifted her hand. Made a fist. And before she could talk herself out of it, she knocked. 3 times. Soft. The pause was about 2 seconds. Then 3 taps came back. From the other side. Identical. The same rhythm. The same pressure. Like a child copying a game. Hannah's knees almost gave out. She backed away from the wall. The journal was still on the table behind her. She couldn't make herself turn around to get it. She just kept backing up until her shoulders hit the front door. Then she fumbled for the handle and pushed it open and stepped out onto the porch. The afternoon light was bright and ordinary. The trees were green. A squirrel was working on something in the yard. Everything was normal. Everything was the way the world was supposed to be. Hannah sat down on the top step. She put her head between her knees as best she could with her belly in the way. She breathed. In. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. The signal was weak this far out, but she had 2 bars. She called the lawyer. It went to voicemail. She left a message. Mr. Pritchett, this is Hannah Walsh. I'm at the cottage. I have some questions about my aunt. Could you call me back when you get a chance? Thank you. Her voice sounded normal, calm, like a person who wasn't losing her mind. She hung up. She sat on the porch for a long time. Long enough to watch the sun move across the yard. Long enough for the squirrel to come back twice. The longer she sat, the more she felt herself coming back to earth. The wall hadn't actually knocked back. Or if it had, there was an explanation. Pipes. Settling. A bird in the eaves. Maybe an animal nesting in the wall. That was a real thing. Animals got into old houses all the time. Maggie's journals were the writings of a lonely old woman who had started imagining a friend. That was sad. That was all it was. Sad. By the time the sun started to dip behind the trees, Hannah felt almost normal again. She stood up, smoothed her dress, went back inside. The cottage was quiet. The journal was where she'd left it on the table. The kettle was on the stove. She put it on to boil. She made herself a cup of tea, lemon and honey, the way her aunt used to make it. She sat down in the soft chair by the wood stove. The chair was warm in the afternoon light. The baby kicked once gently. Hannah put her hand on her belly and smiled. The cottage settled around her. Outside, a bird sang. Hannah closed her eyes. She must have dozed off, because when she opened her eyes the sun was lower and the cottage was full of long gold light. She felt better. She felt almost foolish for how scared she'd been an hour earlier. She got up and walked to the table. The journal was still open. She glanced down at it. There was a piece of paper sticking out from between 2 of the back pages. She hadn't noticed it before. The corner of it was folded, like someone had used it as a bookmark. Hannah pulled it free. It was a drawing. A child's drawing. Crayon on yellowed paper. 2 stick figures holding hands. One was bigger. One was smaller. The smaller one had a long braid going down its back. Above the smaller figure, in shaky, childish letters, someone had written a name. Eliza. Hannah stared at it. She turned the paper over. On the back, in her aunt's familiar handwriting, was a single line. She drew this for her sister. Her sister. Hannah set the drawing down on the table. Her hands didn't feel like her own. She didn't have a sister. She'd been an only child. She'd grown up an only child. Her mother had died when Hannah was 5. Hannah didn't remember much about her. Just the perfume she wore and a song she used to hum. Her father had raised her alone after that, and then he died too when Hannah was 19. There had been no sister. Not ever. A knock came from the wall. Just one this time. Loud. Sharp. Hannah jumped, and the baby kicked hard inside her, and she put a hand on the table to steady herself. Another knock. Then a scraping sound. Slow. Long. Like someone dragging a fingernail down the inside of the plaster. Hannah backed away from the table. She didn't take her eyes off the wall. That was when someone knocked on the front door. Hannah almost screamed. It took her a second to understand the sound was different. Would From the outside, 3 normal knocks. A human visitor. She put her hand over her heart and walked to the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She opened it. An old man stood on the porch. Maybe 70. Heavy coat even though it was warm. A face like a piece of pine bark. He held a small basket of tomatoes in his hands. "You'd be Maggie's niece," he said. "Yes. I'm Walter. From next door." He nodded down the road, where Hannah could just see the corner of another roof through the trees. "Brought you these. Garden's coming in heavy this year." Hannah took the basket. She didn't know what to say. The wall behind her was silent now. The cottage felt almost normal again with another person standing in the doorway. "Would you like to come in?" He looked at her belly. He looked at her face. Something in his eyes shifted, a little. "Just for a minute," he said. She made him tea. He sat at the kitchen table. He didn't look at the journal, but he did not look at it either. Hannah saw the way his eyes moved past it. The way he kept his hands wrapped around his cup. "You knew my aunt well?" Hannah asked. 40 years. She was a good woman. Quiet. Kept to herself, mostly. But a good woman. "Did she ever talk about my mother?" Walter took a long sip of tea. "Some. Did my mother ever have another child?" "Before me." Walter set his cup down. He looked at Hannah for a long moment. "You don't know." "Know what?" "Your mother had a little girl. Before you. 3 years before you. Her name was Eliza. She died of a fever when she was 3 years old. Your mother, well, your mother wasn't well after that. Took her a long time to come back to herself. By the time she had you, things were better. But she never really got over it. Nobody does." Hannah felt very far away from her own body. "Where is she buried?" she asked. Walter looked at his hands. "That's the thing nobody likes to talk about. The way I heard it, your mother wouldn't let her go. Kept the body. Wouldn't let anyone take it. They had to take it from her eventually. Your aunt did. She was the one who could get through to your mother. Maggie took the body. Your mother had a real breakdown after that. They sent her away for a while. When she came back, she had you." "Where did Maggie put her?" Walter shook his head. "Nobody knows. Maggie wouldn't say. She just told everyone Eliza had been laid to rest. Nobody pressed her. People didn't back then. Things were different." Hannah looked at the kitchen wall. Walter saw her look. He didn't follow her eyes. He drank his tea. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I always wondered about that wall," he said soft. "Maggie never let anyone touch that wall." Then he left. Hannah stood in the kitchen for a long time after he was gone. If this story has caught hold of you the way it caught hold of me when I first heard it, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. It really does help, and it lets me keep telling you stories like this one. Then settle back in. Because what happens next is the part Hannah will think about for the rest of her life. She locked the front door. She locked the back door. She closed all the windows. The cottage felt smaller now. She walked to the kitchen wall and put her hand on it. The plaster was cold. She whispered, "Eliza!" She waited. Then, from the other side, very soft, a child's voice said, "Hannah." It knew her name. Hannah didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with every light in the cottage turned on. The journal was in front of her. The drawing was beside it. The voice through the wall hadn't said anything else. She'd waited. She'd put her ear to the plaster. She'd whispered the name back. There had been only silence. Around 3 in the morning, she made a decision. She got up. She walked to the hall closet. Maggie had kept her tools there, the way old women in old houses do. A hammer, a small crowbar, a screwdriver. Hannah took the hammer and the crowbar. She walked back to the kitchen. She stood in front of the wall. The baby was very still inside her. She put one hand on her belly. "I'm sorry," she said. She didn't know if she was talking to her baby or to the child in the wall. Then she swung the hammer. The plaster cracked. A piece the size of her palm fell to the floor. Underneath was wood. Old wood, dark with age. Hannah swung again. And again. The plaster came off in chunks. She worked her way down to the floor. Her arms ached. Her back screamed. She didn't stop. When the plaster was gone, she saw it. A door. A small door only about 3 feet tall. Built right into the wall. The handle had been removed. The seam had been filled in with putty, painted over, then plastered over. Whoever had hidden it had wanted it hidden forever. Hannah used the crowbar. The door gave way with a sound like a long breath being let out. The wood splintered. The hinges, which hadn't moved in decades, finally gave. The door swung open. The smell hit her first. Not bad. Not the smell of death. Just old. Old cloth, old wood, old air that hadn't moved in a long time. A faint trace of lavender, the way the rest of the cottage smelled. Maggie had kept this place too. Tended it. Even this. Hannah ducked her head and looked inside. It was a tiny room. Maybe 4 feet by 6 feet. The ceiling was low. There was a small bed, child-sized, with a quilt on it. A rocking chair. A toy on the floor. A wooden horse with most of the paint worn off. A shelf with a row of small books. Children's books. The pages were yellow. On the bed, on top of the quilt, was a bundle. Hannah knew what was inside before she opened it. She knew, and she opened it anyway, because the not knowing would be worse. The bones were small. So small. They were laid out the way a child sleeps. Curled up a little. The skull was the size of a grapefruit. A few wisps of hair still clung to it. Long hair. The way you'd grow it if you were a little girl who liked her hair long. There was a dress on the bones. White. Lace at the collar. It had been clean once. Now it was just old. Hannah sat down on the floor. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat. The baby kicked very gently, like it was asking if she was all right. Under the bed, she saw the corner of an envelope. She pulled it out. It had her name on it. For Hannah, in case you ever find her. Hannah opened it. The paper inside was thick. Her aunt's handwriting. The same handwriting from the journals, careful and slanted. My dear Hannah, if you are reading this, then I have failed. I'm sorry. I tried at the end to take her with me. I would have liked to be buried with her in my arms. But the thing about Eliza is that she has a way of staying. Your sister died when she was 3. Your mother could not bear it. She kept Eliza in her bed for almost a week before anyone could take her. When they did, your mother stopped speaking for a year. I took the body. I built this room. I put her here because I thought if I kept her warm, your mother might come back. And she did, in a way. She had you. She loved you. She tried. But Eliza never left. I don't know how to explain this. I'm not a religious woman, and I am not a foolish one. But Eliza never left. Sometimes I would hear her knock. Sometimes I would hear her sing. She was lonely. She was 3 years old, and she was lonely, and I was the only one who knew she was there. So I fed her warmth. I sang to her. I read to her. For 40 years I kept her company. It was a small thing to do for a little girl who never had a chance to be old. I had hoped to take her with me when I went. I tried. I lay down beside her wall on my last night. I told her to come. She didn't come. She wants to be free, Hannah. I think she's waited long enough. Or maybe she's waited for the right person. Someone in this family. Someone who will know what to do. You came. Please, take her out of the wall. Bury her in the garden, under the rose bush. The rose bush was hers. I planted it the year she was born. Tell her she's your sister. Tell her you'll remember her name. Tell her she's allowed to go. She's your sister, Hannah. She was always your sister. I love you. I always did. Even from far away. Maggie. Hannah folded the letter. She put her hand on the small skull. She didn't know why. Maybe because it was what an older sister does. Maybe because she had been an older sister this whole time and never known it. The cottage was perfectly silent. Hannah said, out loud, "It's all right. I'm here now." The baby inside her kicked once, gently like an answer, and in the wall, in the small dark room, something that had been knocking for 40 years finally went still. Morning came slow. The sun rose through the kitchen window and laid a square of yellow light across the floor. Hannah was still sitting where she'd been all night. Her back was on fire. Her ankles were like stones. She dozed once or twice sitting up. The baby had let her. She stood up. Took her a long time. She held onto the table. She found a clean white sheet in the linen closet. The one with the small embroidered flowers along the edge. Maggie had probably embroidered it herself. Hannah took it back to the kitchen. She wrapped Eliza very carefully. The bones were lighter than she expected. She could carry them in one arm the way you'd carry a baby. She did. She walked out the back door, holding her sister, and she walked across the yard to the rose bush. The rose bush was old, tall. It had been there longer than most of the trees in the yard. The blooms were starting to come in, pink and white and small. Hannah set the bundle down beside it. She went to the shed. She found Maggie's spade. She came back. She dug. Took her 2 hours. 8 months pregnant. Digging a grave. She had to stop a lot. She had to sit down once and breathe through a contraction that turned out to be nothing. Just her body practicing. She kept digging. When the hole was deep enough, she stopped. She laid Eliza in. She said the things she'd thought about all night. "You're my sister. I didn't know. I'm sorry I didn't know. I have a daughter coming. She's gonna know about you. I'm going to tell her she had an aunt named Eliza who liked to draw, and who had long hair. I'm going to put your drawing on her wall. You're not forgotten. Not anymore." Hannah covered the grave. She patted the dirt down with her hands. She put 2 of the rose bush's blooms on top. She stood up. She listened. The cottage was quiet. The yard was quiet. A bird called from the woods, just one, and then was quiet again. Eliza was at rest. Hannah went inside. She sat in the soft chair by the wood stove. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in a week, she slept all the way through to evening. She had her daughter 4 weeks later. It was a hard labor. Long. The midwife from down the road, an old friend of Maggie's named Ruth, came when Hannah called and stayed for 2 days. The cottage was warm. The wood stove was lit. The kitchen wall was patched and painted, and there was no door behind it anymore. Hannah had filled the small hidden room with earth and sealed it. It was just part of the wall now, just a thicker corner. Quiet. The baby was born in the bedroom. Healthy, loud, pink, 6 pounds and 1 ounce. Hannah named her Margaret. She called her Maggie. The first night, after Ruth had gone, Hannah sat up in the bed with the baby on her chest. The cottage was silent. The kind of silent that's full of small good sounds. The wood stove creaking. The wind in the trees. The baby breathing. There was no knocking. There never was again. The years passed. Hannah stayed in the cottage. She'd thought at first that she'd sell it once the baby was born. She didn't. There was nothing waiting for her back in the city. And the cottage, she found, was a kind place to raise a child. The schools were small. The neighbors were the kind who brought tomatoes. Walter became something like a grandfather to little Maggie. He taught her how to find blueberries in the woods. He taught her how to listen for owls. Hannah kept the journals on the shelf. She never read them again. She didn't need to. She'd read what she needed to read. The drawing of 2 girls holding hands she did keep. She had it framed. She hung it in Maggie's bedroom, over the dresser. Maggie liked it. She would stand on her tiptoes sometimes and touch it. "Who are they?" Hannah asked her once, when Maggie was 3. "That's me," Maggie said. "And the other girl." "What other girl?" "The one who used to live here." Hannah was quiet for a moment. The kitchen window was open. The rose bush outside was in full bloom. "What does she look like?" "Like me. Just littler." "Is she here now?" Maggie shook her head. She just visits sometimes. She likes the roses. Hannah didn't ask anymore. She took the drawing down off the wall that night, after Maggie was asleep. She carried it to the kitchen. She opened the leather journal on the shelf and tucked the drawing inside, next to the older one. The one Eliza had made all those years ago of two girls holding hands. 2 drawings now. 2 sisters. One older, one younger. Joined across a kitchen wall and 40 years and a small grave under a rose bush. Hannah closed the journal. She put it back on the shelf. She locked the brass clasp. She put the key in the drawer of the desk in the corner of the living room, the same place her aunt had always kept it. The cottage was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the rose bush. The petals fell slow. In the bedroom, the little girl slept. And in the warm dark of the cottage that had once held a secret, there was nothing left to knock. Only family. Only home.